name is Kim Caldwell, and I'm here with the No Kid Hungry campaign, and thrilled to have you guys with us today. For those of you who may be new to Share Our Strength, our mission is to end childhood hunger in America, and we're doing that by better connecting kids to the federal nutrition programs, increasing access to those programs, school breakfast, after-school meals, summer meals, empowering families to use our Cooking Matters curriculum to increase their cooking skills and better use their resources at the grocery store. And then we're trying to drive awareness at a national level about the importance of and what it takes to end childhood hunger in our country. Within the Center for Best Practices, what we're really doing is looking at what works across the country and trying to get that back out into the field through tools, research, trainings, connections, and consultations, so that as we are seeing in one city or in one state really great work, we're able to replicate that in other areas. So I do want to start by saying a big thank you to Deloitte. They're here today, and they have been incredible partners in our work to end childhood hunger here in America. They partnered with us to develop the school breakfast social impact analysis, and we were thrilled to work with them, again, to take a deeper look at summer meals. I also want to say thank you to the Arby's Foundation, whose support of our No Kid Hungry efforts made it possible for us to put together this report and this webinar. So a little bit about our time today. We're going to start with an overview from Deloitte of Summer Nutrition Program Impact Analysis. We're going to pause for questions after that, and then we're going to dive a little deeper into what it looks like to put this social impact analysis into practice. We'll have some questions again at that point before we close. A little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this webinar for future use. So if you have any issues or concerns about having your voice on a recording, feel free to use the chat function to send in your questions. And during those 2 breaks, we will also give you the opportunity to raise your hand and ask a question out loud, at which point we will unmute you. So at any point, feel free to chat in. Otherwise, we will look forward to hearing from you at our question breaks. We're thrilled to have a big group in the room today. Nell Todd, Erica Pincus, and Katie Orbis, thank you, from Deloitte, and Christy Felling here from Share Our Strength. So with that, I will pass it over to our friends from Deloitte.
Great, thank you so much, and hello to everyone on what is in DC a beautiful summer afternoon. Thank you to Share Our Strength. It's been such a wonderful opportunity to partner with you guys, and we've just really enjoyed this particular effort. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking through the work that we did, and then hand it over to my colleague who's going to discuss some of the specific analysis, and then, as was stated, we'll stop for questions. Over the last several months, Deloitte and Share Our Strength did a social impact analysis on the importance of summer nutrition programs. And we started off with the conversation was such that we said, well, we know the inherent benefits of making summer food programs more accessible, but there has been less information or fewer studies on quantifying those benefits. And so that was our hope and our goal in doing this study. We focused on 3 particular types of benefits: food security and nutrition, health and education outcomes, and then economic outcomes as well. And our hope today and in the future is that you can use this analysis to advance your own causes, that you can use some of the data, whether it be for reports or for key decision making. But our hope is that this information will help you advance the work that you are all doing throughout the country. We'll turn the page and look at the 3 components of the work that we did. The first is a white paper, and that is online, I believe, on Share Our Strength's website, so you can download it. And it is a paper that gathers, as it says up here, over 100 statistics from over 60 academic research articles, publications, that we use to be able to, in one place, which I think is one of the first times that we've been able to put all this information into one place, into a coherent impact story. And again, the goal is for you to be able to use this data in driving your own conversations. Then what we did, and this was probably halfway through our analysis, we took a step back and said, there's a really good story and a good impact story. Can we prove this in a particular state? And in fact, we were able to use the Maryland Open Government or Open Data, as well as some specific data sources from Share a Strength, to analyze the correlation between education outcomes and school-based summer nutrition programs. And we're able to identify statistically significant, a statistically significant correlation, in which Katie will speak to in a little bit. And then Christy at the end will talk about the micro report, which extrapolates some of the work for targeted audiences. So let's turn to our initial research findings. So the first focus we had is on the immediate impacts of summer nutrition programs. For about 21.5 million children, they're receiving food or other school meal programs throughout the school year. But that number decreases to only 3.3 million over the summer. So it's almost an 18 million children gap in those individuals who are not receiving summer meals during the summer. One of the studies, and this was a study that USDA did, the SEBTC study, was able to show that reducing the number of children experience very low food security, they were able to decrease it by almost 1/3 by offering a specific type of program for kids during the summer. And that by doing that, they were able to increase their nutrition in terms of the more fruits and vegetables, whole grains, dairy, what have you. And so the idea is that by expanding summer nutrition programs, you are decreasing food security and increasing nutrition. So what does food security and nutrition have on health impacts? There's three specific impacts. The first is on weight gain, the second is chronic diseases, and the third is on mental health. So in the first, with weight gain, the children may gain weight up to 2 to 3 times faster during the summer. There are chronic diseases, so that when a child gains weight, that he or she is more susceptible to chronic diseases, and that they might experience higher rates of mental illness when facing increase in food insecurity. So 3 significant health impacts. The next is the education impact. So increased food security and nutrition also can help avoid negative downstream education impacts for children. And again, 3 significant areas. One is on cognitive functioning and development, the second is on summer learning loss, and the third is the achievement gap. So nutritious meals protect against cognitive decline. I think 2 really interesting studies, the summer learning loss. Children from low-income families lose more than 2 months in reading achievement compared to their peers from middle-class families. And with the achievement gap, as it says up here, 2/3 of 9th grade achievement gap between lower and higher income youth can be explained by unequal access to summer learning opportunities during their elementary school years. So again, 3 specific and really significant education impacts. So the next set of impacts that we looked at were the economic impacts. And the thinking is that, well, if you look at those education impacts, you look at those health impacts, together what does that mean from an economic standpoint? And there are 4 areas of economic impacts. The food insecurity cost, the elevated BMI cost, reteaching costs, and an economic output cost. So I'll just speak a little bit more specifically about each of these. The first is that food insecure children are 31% more likely to be hospitalized. And the average hospitalization cost for those children is approximately $12,000. When you look at an elevated BMI cost, you're looking at almost $14.1 billion in health expenses and hospitalization costs annually. The reteaching cost, 2 months of reteaching costs account for about 22% of the school year and just over $1,500 per student. And then finally, the economic output. So the high school graduates earn an average of $10,000 or just over more annually than those who do not graduate. And as you'll see later, when we start to look at how these impacts relate to one another, you can see how the correlation between an increase in graduation rates and the summer programs and how that can impact from an economic standpoint. So I think I'll pause here. I went through things very quickly, but I'll pause here to see if there's any questions. So Erica and Katie, any key points that either we missed or that you want to elaborate on?
I think you covered them all. Yeah, I think when we dive into the case study, there may be a few more. The case study will make this a little more real.
Okay, so if there are no, are there questions? Okay, so let's turn over to the case study, which puts all of this into practice.
Great. So we found all of these great things in research that connect summer food programs to these impacts. And so what we focused on was actually the education side of this. So we'll start with the overall approach of how we approach this data analysis. The first step was identifying the research question we wanted to ask, which in this case was, is there a difference between student educational achievement at schools that offer summer nutrition programs and schools that do not? So to put that simply, if you have a school that has a summer nutrition program, do they perform any better than schools that don't? The next step in this was to locate, connect, and analyze the data. So first we needed to identify the different sources of data that we needed, which in this case were student achievement data, free and reduced meal eligibility data, and summer nutrition program site lists. So through this we found that Maryland was the best area to have all of these due to their open download. They're actually an open data site state, which is great. So once we found this, we actually connected all of the data because it was very disparate and in different places, and we're able to analyze it and create a visualization to really be able to see what was going on in the data. From there, now that we had this great analysis, we wanted to tell the story. So what we found was a correlational difference in educational achievement between schools that had summer nutrition programs and schools that didn't. So to put this into a story, we ran the analysis and visualized it, and then also started to extrapolate the data to put more meaning behind it. So the results, what you see here are 3 different graphs. So these are the 3 analyses that we ran. The first was on math proficiency, the second was on reading proficiency, and the third was on graduation rates. So I know that these look kind of just like dot charts and aren't as intuitive to see right offhand, but what you'll see is if we take the math proficiency graph as an example, there's 2 different types of dots. Each dot is actually a school, and that school is plotted on their math proficiency. So an example would be a school that had 90% math proficiency, and then their free and reduced meal eligibility. So that could range from 100 to 0% free and reduced meal eligibility within their school. And then what we did is we segmented these dots by either having a summer nutrition program or not having one. And in this case, the orange is having a summer nutrition program, and the blue is not having a summer nutrition program. And what you'll see in this data is that the orange line sits above the blue line in all 3 cases, but at different proportions. So when we ran the analysis, what we found is that in math, students at schools with summer nutrition programs achieved 2.0% to 2.5% higher math proficiency. For reading, it was a 0.4% to 2%, and for graduation rates, it was 2.2% to 5%. So this basically just shows the correlational analysis that we ran and the findings from it. So to put additional meaning to this data, because 2% and 0.4% doesn't necessarily mean anything right offhand, what we decided to do is extrapolate this. So we took the results and put it to all the schools that don't currently have summer nutrition programs. So if these schools offered summer nutrition programs and saw the 2% increase, what you would see is each of these things happening. So for math, 2% means that 5,600 more students would achieve math proficiency each year. For reading, 0.4% would mean 1,150 more students would achieve math reading proficiency each year. And for high school, just 2.2% increase would mean that 760 more high school graduates each year would occur. And then to take this one step further, what that 760 more high school graduates means is that 4.7 million more earnings would occur each year from these graduates. So this is a correlational study that just shows that if the percentages remain consistent and these schools offered summer nutrition programs, these are numbers that could be expected to be seen. So I know that was a lot really quickly for data analysis. So we're really happy to take questions at this time on any of the impacts or data or Maryland-specific questions.
There was a question earlier about when those initial costs were being shared, were those costs annualized?
Yeah, so we're actually going to jump in the next section into impact extrapolation, and that goes a little bit more in detail into what that cost would mean on an annual basis.
Let's give just a moment longer in case anyone would like to raise their hand and ask a question. Okay, great. We'll have, wait, is there another question? So how do you control for other factors that may affect summer achievement besides the meals?
So this was a simple bivariate correlational analysis. So we didn't control for other factors. We just simply put the plots on the line to see if there was any difference between the two.
That's the difference between correlation and causation.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So what we are saying here is that based on looking at comparing these two types of things, we see that there's a correlation.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And the study as a whole, looking at the impact report, shows, again, that research that Nell described earlier, looking at the existing research on why these impacts hold true, and then the case study that Katie just described was just kind of used as a validation point. So it wasn't, the entire study wasn't based on that, it was more of a supporting factor.
Great, and there's another question. So in two of the free graphs, as the free and reduced percentage increases, the difference between the summer feeding and non-summer feeding decreases. This seems counterintuitive, and can you explain why this might happen?
Yeah, so what you'll see is the line always stays above, but if you look at the higher free and reduced eligibility, there's more factors there, right? So since this is a bivariate correlational study, it's more along the lines of creating interesting conversation and also showing, that there is a difference, but as you go further across that line, other factors could be influencing it.
But the key, Katie, is that they're not ever going
right.
below.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Great. Are we allowed to ask if that answers their question?
The other part of this is we actually used the lowest percentage when we did the extrapolations. So we used that smallest part of the line. So we used the 2%, we used the 0.4%, and the 2.2% to do the extrapolations just to be cautious. But you would actually expect it to be a little bit higher than that if the percentages hold consistent.
Great. So why don't we head in to see dive a little deeper to see how we might use this information in practice, and then we'll know that there are more opportunities for questions later in the event.
Hey guys, my name is Christy Felling. I'm the Director for Strategic Communications here at Share a Strength and No Kid Hungry. And I am not a researcher. I am not an academic. I live my professional life according to one sentence, and that is, how do we get the right people to take the right action at the right time? And so whenever our Center for Best Practices brings me a treasure like this report that is just chock full with interesting facts and graphs, I say, this is amazing. How am I going to use this to get the right people to take the right action at the right time? And so when we first looked into this, I realized that we had two very, very specific goals around summer, this summer in 2015. The first was, how do we get more kids participating in the current summer meals program? How do we support those programs, grow those programs, and increase participation? The second was, how do we get the policy changes affected on the national level, on the federal level, that allows us to tweak the program so that more kids in the future, especially from hard-to-reach areas and rural areas, are able to access summer meals? So with those as my goals and this as my tool, my team sat down and said, okay, who's our audience? Before we get into tactics and what to do with this information, who do we need to reach? And we realized that this wasn't really aimed at our broad social network. This was not aimed at our pledge takers and the general public. The need for this and the goal for this was very targeted and very specific. We needed to get this information into the hands of political reporters, Hill staff, and decision makers. We needed to get this in front of the people who were actually able to make the changes to the program that allowed more kids to get that critical foods they needed during the summertime. With that in mind, we realized that we could keep the message a little bit wonkier, a little bit more in-depth, a little bit more targeted than we might for some of our other consumer-facing things, because the people we were dealing with, for the most part, had a basis of knowledge of this, had a policy background, and knew the kinds of questions they were looking for. The next piece after we had our goal, our audience, and our general message theme was to do a quick climate scan. This is looking at our audience and asking the question, what are they actually concerned with? How do we meet them where they are on topics? And we realized, we looked at a lot of the polling that's been done recently and realized that the people we were trying to reach, again, political reporters and Hill staffers and decision makers, they were also really concerned with health, with education, and with the economy. Those are the three things that always hit 1, 2, and 3 in Gallup, in Quinnipiac, and in a lot of the other polling that we've done. So we took a look at this and said, how do we show that ending summer hunger actually has an effect on healthcare costs, avoidable healthcare costs, on education achievement, and on the economy? At the same time, knowing that our goal was to address these reporters, these Hill staff, these decision makers, we also know one thing about them, and that is that they are very busy, and you have about a split second, if even that, to get their attention. So we knew we had to do something short and snappy to grab them, that then drew them in and then led them to this white paper. So to do all of those things, we decided to come up with what you see here on the screen, which is a micro report. This is a one-page, front and back, that distilled some of these topics down and made sure that it was very clear what we were trying to get across. We also knew that one of the big conversations happening in Washington, D.C. and in many state houses is around budget right now. So we really wanted to use this information to show that, frankly, it is more expensive to ignore hungry children than it is to just go ahead and figure out how to feed them. And so we took all of the information in here and ran it through that lens when we were deciding which pieces to pull out and to put into this one-pager. Again, this is not meant to supplant or to replace the white paper. This was more supposed to really grab their attention and say, hey, look at this. Guess what? This is not only just a standalone issue. Hunger is not just a hunger issue. Hunger is an education issue. Hunger is a health issue. Hunger is a budget issue. And hunger is an economic issue. So we looked at the very specific pieces of the information. We went through the white paper time and time again with a highlighter to say what jumps out and grabs you with this. And then how do we take those and make it digestible, make it powerful, and make it very relatable. So as you'll see in this micro report, we teased out a couple of very specific things. Number one, we talked about how hunger and ignoring summer hunger leads to long-term consequences. We then went into some of the findings, and in that middle section showed that when you extrapolate the information in this Deloitte report, in the white paper on this, if you were to take that to its logical conclusion, and if you were to put it into an equation that showed the impact that could be had at the national level, you could see, for example, potentially 22,000 or so kids, fewer childhood hospitalizations. And at 12 grand a pop, that could lead to about 274 million less in avoidable health care costs. That's something that grabbed reporters' attentions and got them thinking. Another, when you sort of follow these through to their natural conclusions, you could see as many as 81,000 high school graduates each year. And for reporters who follow high school graduation levels, they know how difficult and near impossible it is to increase high school graduation by a child, let alone 81,000. So this helped to really underscore the impact that we were talking about. We also knew that since these people are incredibly busy, graphics always work. So you'll see on the far side, we took one of the graphics that was in the white report itself and blew it up a little bit so it really jumped out. If you want to go to the next slide. This is more about that impact extrapolation that shows how we were able to go how we were able to take some of these and go wide with this. And so once we had this in place, we then had a very, very specific, targeted, and strategic way to get this information out. As much as Field of Dreams may have tried to teach us that if you build it, they will come, we know that when you put these reports together, that's never the case. And so we had a really, really dynamic and strategic way to get this out. We, first of all, went to bloggers and reporters that we knew wanted to cover this kind of thing. And it was everything from the progressive website Think Progress to Huffington Post to mentions on CNN and MSNBC. We wove this information into speeches that our executives were giving. We brought this micro report to the Hill for Hill meetings and specifically walked staffers through it with the greater white report in our back pockets as a leave behind. We tweeted about this on social media. We shared it with our partners. Arby's, who was a phenomenal sponsor of this, shared it with their partners. And we also teased out little bits and pieces of even this teased out little bit and piece into small bite-sized sentences that we added to the pitches that we were giving to reporters across the board for everything else we were doing this summer. And at the end of the day, we were able to get the message out about the importance of hunger, using this as a tool, and then bringing it back to the white report itself for people to take a deeper dive and to see the actual research behind the pieces that were in this. You can't see the back page of this where you are, but we also included quotes from people that we worked with in the field to give it a level of authenticity and to show how this really, this issue really was playing out in the states and on the local level. And then we also had a conclusion that wrapped everything up nicely and showed how the research in this report supported our goals, again, of increasing participation, supporting existing sites, and changing policy. And that, in a nutshell, is what we decided to do with this report and why we decided to do it. And for any of you who know me, I can talk about building a strategic communications plan for hours, but I will leave myself at 7 minutes and see if there are any questions or other things people in the room would like to talk about.
Actually, I think really quickly, if our friends from Deloitte could go back over the bigger extrapolations that Christy referenced.
I'm pretty sure they're all covered, but Katie, do you want to go through them?
Yeah, I believe Christy touched on most of them. But basically at the tail end of our report is an appendix which shows an impact extrapolations, which is exactly what Christy mentioned. It takes the findings in the report in those little key boxes that Nell went over earlier and extrapolates them nationally. So basically to who isn't receiving food. So what you'll see there is the health, education, and economic, do we get that? No, health and education benefits as well as some economic factors as well. And so that's the impact extrapolation in a nutshell. Erica, did you want to add anything? You covered it.
And to go to the person's question about annual, these are extrapolated at an annual level.
And so the idea is that this is closing that gap between those currently receiving summer nutrition, which we listed as 3.3 million, and those receiving the free and reduced price lunch during the school year.
Correct.
So that's our universe here.
Yeah.
Great. So like we said, there are two main pieces here which are available for you to download on the Center for Best Practices website. We will send this to you, to everyone who registered for the webinar. In the follow-up information, you will be linked to this page so you can download it, memorize it, use it in every possible way, even if it's just finding in all of the bibliography different reports that you can use to strengthen your own grant applications, to help your funders and help your community understand why it is so important that we address summer nutrition.
And we would love to learn from you. As you use this and find it effective, please close the feedback loop and let us know how you used it and what happened, because we're always trying to make these bigger, stronger, and more effective. And it's really helpful to know which pieces worked, which pieces maybe didn't, and how you're using this out in the field.
So I think there was an additional question for Deloitte about whether we plan to kind of go back and control for variables such as income level, race and ethnicity, other programming offered during the school year to see if there remains a statistical significance.
Those are all great questions and really, really important variables. At this time, we don't have a plan to revisit the analysis. That may change, but at the time, that's not the plan.
Are there other questions? Anything that really surprised you as you worked on all of these, looked through all of these different research?
I was definitely surprised by the amount of research that was out there and just needed to be connected through different ways. And then we were also surprised as we were doing the data analysis to find that there was anything out there, correlational or not. It was really interesting to just kind of visualize the data and see, just a strictly correlational finding. That was really interesting. And hopefully other researchers will take this and actually do a causational study. That would be great if someone in the academic field finds this topic interesting and takes it to the next level to really prove the findings in this report.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits is to what you said is that there are over 50 sources all in one document. And I think and I hope that will be really beneficial for those individuals who are looking for one place to be able to build off of and to conduct their own research. And the Maryland case study, I think, is a really great example. And with only, I think, three data sources, we were able to do that correlational analysis. And whether you would be able to replicate that in your own states, it would be wonderful if you were able to do something like that and use this report as a guide to help you do that.
And do you think it's clear in the full white paper what that data source was and how others might, do you have any recommendations for where people might start to find those data sources?
Yeah, definitely. We actually looked at a few states, and Maryland had the most complete set of data. But basically, you can look on any state with open data. There's 10 of them, actually, and try and find the educational achievement status as well as the free and reduced eligibility rate. Some of them call it FARMS, others call it F/R. So if you can find a unique identifier between the schools so that you can map the different data sources to that unique identifier, that's how you can really start to put all of the different Excel files that you'll be able to download together into one so that you can actually run a cohesive analysis and start segmenting by different variables and by different whatever you'd like to research.
So once you find a data source that links school achievement to school, then you just need to know the free and reduced price for each school and whether or not they have summer nutrition programming.
Yeah, you don't even need the price. You just need to know whether or not they have the site.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. So some of the questions that we've gotten from Shannon and Lucinda on the call have to do with localizing the information. So what is your recommendation for bringing this to the local level when the case study is about Maryland?
I think that there are quite a few ways that you can localize, especially the micro report. I think that you can use that as a jump-off to show the national part, but then plug in local information around how many children, for example, are struggling to get a summer meal in, say, Connecticut or Nevada or Texas, and then show what that actually could mean, crunching the numbers through that. I think it also really shows the different buckets of information that local officials have shown that they are really interested in. So even just being able to say the average cost of a child's hospitalization is about $12,000, and in our state we have avoidable child hospitalizations connected to hunger because about hungry children have a 30% or so higher chance of being hospitalized, and you can start to put those numbers together. But I think it's a great conversation starter so that local officials can really see the effect in your town around health, education, and the economy.
Great. So we have another question from Carol asking whether we, in these data points about having nutrition programs, was it just school-based nutrition and summer nutrition programs, or did you look at places where there were community sites as well?
So we could only get our hands on school-based data, so that's what we focused on, was strictly the school-based data.
And as Katie said, I mean, the questions that you're asking and the suggestions are all really, really spot on, and many of the questions we asked ourselves. And I think one of the lessons is going forward, if these are some of the questions that we as a community want to be able to address, what are the data sources that we need to be able to address those questions, and how do we make sure that we are working together to gather them? Because my hope is that the Maryland case study is, as Katie said, the first of many quantifiable analyses done on the impact on summer programs. So collectively, if we can work together on thinking through what that data is and how do we gather that data, that will only advance the conversation.
If you go to nokithungry.org/summer, on that website you can find this micro report as well as a state-by-state analysis of summer hunger and maps that we have found very effective in showing places that are not eligible for hungry kids to get meals easily. And so we usually have teamed this report up with one of those maps when we talk to local reporters, with one of the state-by-state analyses, or with some of this other information. So as we use this, it was very rarely as a standalone product. We usually wove it into other conversations that we were having, again, with our influencers and decision makers.
Great. So we have another question about how this research protocol might be applied to breakfast. And I know we have done a social impact analysis with you guys on breakfast. Did this raise any new questions for you about how looking at things this way might be applied to school breakfast programs?
Yeah, so there is, as you mentioned at the beginning, there is a breakfast social impact analysis study, which is still on your website, right? It was done, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and I think, got a large national conversation around the importance of breakfast. And the difference between that report and this report, there had actually been more research done on the impact of breakfast that report leveraged. And this versus this report, where there had been less primary research, not secondary research, but less primary research on the impacts of summer food. So I think the conversation is more advanced in breakfast. So the answer is yes, it's been done. I think some of the lessons that we've learned, it gets to one of the questions about how to localize the analysis and how to localize the statistics. And if you recall, when Katie talked about using the low end of the percentages in order to extrapolate, one of the reasons why we did that was because we felt that that would be a more useful way of extrapolating that, especially if other states were to use some of those percentages as guideposts. So we did learn some lessons from the breakfast analysis as a way of applying in the summer for the summer analysis.
And you can find the school breakfast analysis on our Center for Best Practices website under school breakfast, and it is called literally School Breakfast, a Social Impact Analysis. So it's easy to find.
Yeah, I think for that one, and we can review the report, Nancy, to your question about kind of conducting your own state level data on school outcomes and breakfast programs. Hopefully we'll have some similar clues in there for doing that, and we can follow up after the call as well. To think about how to use these data sources to answer questions, because I think these correlation reports really help us take a look at what's happening in the state and how are these things related. So, Christy, I think this question is for you from Alan, whether this information has been shared with the legislators considering the Summer Meals Act.
Alan, yes, it has. That is my very first stop with all of this. So we took this to all of our Hill meetings in packets that also included the state-by-state maps, the state-by-state analysis, and our summer meals policy recommendations, which you can also find on the nokithungry.org/summer. We also sent it directly to reporters covering the politics in the states of our friends on Senate Ag and House Workforce and Education on the federal level. We also sent it to the press secretaries in each of those offices and have made it available as a research for the staffers who are working on the issue. So we got this out there hard and fast, and I think that it really did help in getting a bill that dropped last Wednesday called the Hunger-Free Summer for Kids Act that has a lot of our policy recommendations included. So I do believe that it was integral in our efforts on the federal level, and hope that it would also be helpful in all of the efforts that people are undertaking on the state level as well.
So we've shared that it's, we know that elected officials always love to hear from their constituents more than they like to hear from us. So we will make sure that you, in the follow-up, receive information about where you can access all of these reports. We'll also link to the school breakfast report, and then I think we'll make sure that you get access to those maps from your state as well to get a sense of what it looks like where you live to reach kids through summer meals. So I think we are out of questions at this point. We can pause or just if any more pop in while we're wrapping up. I want to say thank you again to all of our speakers and to Deloitte for their amazing partnership to put together this report and all of this research. And thank you again to the Arby's Foundation for supporting our No Kid Hungry efforts and making it possible for us to hold webinars like this one. So I want to say thank you all on the phone for your time. We know it's the hard work that you guys do across the country that helps take this type of research and turn it into Meals for Kids. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you all on the next one.